Thank you very much for attending the session. We are going to start, and I'd like to introduce my colleagues, but I'm not going to. So you know that my colleagues, this is Marty Abbott, this is Bill Rivers, and Dan Davidson, and these are two commissioners from the Academy Commission, and this panel, and Bill Rivers is our lobbyist in this country for language, and this panel is to establish a connection, a stronger connection with you, with the membership of our profession. That's the point of this. So we're going to try as best we can to get out of your way and let you interact with us if you can and ask a lot of hard questions. It would be good. My role at this stage is to set a little bit of historical perspective, if I may. And that has to do with, we had another commission, a presidential commission, as you probably know, in 1979, Carter Commission. And that commission was very interesting for several reasons. One, it only had one language person on it. A man by the name of Rassius, you all know that name, presumably. It also had over 6 dozen recommendations, made 6 dozen at least, and its implementation was at best serendipitous. What I would like to point out at this stage is that the language profession has been intimately involved in initiating and implementing this commission report and its recommendations. And that's what we want to stress, because the language profession is you. Okay, and so that's where we're going to end up. But I'd like to point out that at the beginning, this started with basically the British Academy had launched a major national language initiative. And the American Academy was invited to participate with the British Academy. And they saw it, and they brought it back home. So we owe, as colonialists, we know how to handle this. And so that was a major, major reason for launching this. And then ACTFL, together with JNCL, worked very hard with Congress to get a mandate from the Congress. And that mandate basically looked like this. It was a broad mandate, if you will. And if you're talking about the diplomatic and if you will, the national security issues, always relevant for Congress. But it's really moving more towards the next generation, thinking more strategically about the next generation. And if you see those broad mandates, those were the mandates, and this broadness was something that was very interesting and had a major influence on how the actual commission operated. Because the commission operated very specifically, not looking at 72 recommendations, but looking at a small set of broad recommendations under which there could be a lot of flexibility. And another aspect of this is the fact that the profession, those of us who worked hard with the commission, were committed to one thing. When we spoke to the commission, the head of the American Academy and its senior staff, we said, if you do this, the profession will be very proactive in responding and implementing. Unlike the original, or unlike the former commission, it's not going to be serendipitous. It's going to be very carefully designed implementation. And it's going to be made easier because we have a broader umbrella under which all of us and our initiatives can fall. And those are the two, I think, distinctive factors of this commission and its report that we're going to talk about. And I would only say that, again, I'm going to underline the fact that it has to do with a major promise made to the American Academy. You go down this road, this profession will be proactively and courageously implementing what you recommend, because unlike before, we know the commissioners, there are commissioners from this profession, and the rest of the commissioners are very positively concerned with language. But we have leadership on the commission. We have three. Rosemary Field is not here, the other commissioner, along with Dan Davidson and Marty Abbott. But again, it's the language profession taking very strong interest and very proactive role in working with the Academy to produce what we have here. First, a statistical report, which you can get online, and most importantly, the actual report. And I'll say one more word, and then we'll move on to a commissioner and the recommendations. The phrase America's languages are very important. It's not about considering languages foreign. It's not even about considering languages world. It's about considering languages ours. Whether they're the First Nations or indigenous peoples, whether it's our colonial languages, whether it's our immigrant languages, whether it's our world education languages, all of this, including ancient Latin and Greek, and including American Sign Languages. These are all our languages. They're not the world's, they're ours. That's the point. So we're going to proceed with Dan Davidson talking about the Commission's recommendations. Then we're going to move to the implementation strategy that the Academy and this group has worked out, and that is a working group to work on implementing what we're doing with you, and that's what Bill Rivers will talk about. And then Marty will end with showing how, give examples of what this collaboration is and how we're going to move together as a profession with our partners in business and government and heritage indigenous communities together, how we're going to implement this remarkable study. Dan Davidson.
Thank you, Richard, for the context. And I have a copy of the report here in front of me, and it's also available online at amacad.org. If you just go to that site, you'll see it right there, and you can download it as well as with all the important white papers that back it up. The first recommendation is, let me read to you the first recommendation. In some senses, it is the most important one of all by the Academy, and it goes like this. The Commission on Language Learning recommends a national strategy to improve access to as many languages as possible for people of every region, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. That is, to value language education as a persistent national need, similar to education in math and English, and to assure that a useful level of proficiency is within every student's reach. Extremely strong statement. This is core, and that's the position of the American Academy. Turning now to the specific recommendations, looking at the distribution, availability of language learning around the United States, the Commission found something that was, frankly, very disturbing. And we mentioned it here with Marty a year ago at this session, but it's now something you can look at if you go to the National Foreign Language Enrollment Survey, located on the American Council's website, but just Google National Foreign Language Enrollment Survey and you'll find it. It's an interactive map that allows you to look at language or language-specific enrollments anywhere in the United States. And what you will see there is an enormous difference in language enrollments by state, ranging as high as 60% of students registered for a foreign language in some school districts to as low as 7 or 8% in other states, and overall about 20.1% of all American students having access to a foreign language at the K-12 level. This can be compared, for example, to the European Union, where in the K-8 range, 88% of all students have access to a foreign language. And obviously one of the problems is investment per pupil, but another serious problem, and the first identified by the Commission, is the lack of availability of qualified teachers. And so the Commission urges a major national effort and strategy to attract talented and enthusiastic teachers, using federal initiatives, loan forgiveness programs, and other mechanisms that are available to our government to attract more teachers to fill the needs, to also encourage coordination of state credentialing systems so that qualified teachers can find work in regions where there are significant shortages. As you've heard here at ACTFL, it's often the case that the teacher is needed not in the district where she is, but in the one next to it where a teacher with that qualification is missing. To make use of technology in a smarter way than we currently are, including use of blended learning, but in no way in the Commission sees technology as somehow replacing teachers. No one in the Commission took that position, but rather that we can make better and smarter use of the technologies than we currently do. And most certainly to look not only upstream and downstream at pre-service and in-service teachers, but to make sure that we're providing teachers at wherever they are in their professional careers with appropriate professional development opportunities, including opportunities for advanced training in languages which they teach, languages that themselves are changing so rapidly that if you haven't been back in the country to use that language in the last 5 years, you probably yourself are lagging behind a little bit in that. That's recommendation number 1. I won't dwell that long on every one, but recommendation 1 is very, very important, we think. It's kind of critical to making the whole thing stand up. Recommendation 2, supplement, sorry, here it is. There it is, yes. Supplement language instruction across the education system through public-private partnerships among school, government, philanthropies, business, and local community members. Many of you in this room already are doing this, but it's a simple principle of breaking down the walls between our classrooms and the real world outside where these very languages are spoken and used by people in the same community. Very often it's in business situations, sometimes it's an elderly support home for elderly speakers of that language. It may be the very important work of our AATs around this country, and that was one of the things the Commission understood, is that the way in which the infrastructure of foreign language in the United States is upheld and supported, the standards set, the quality of teaching maintained through organizations like ACTFL, the AATs, also represented in this room. We also took note of extraordinary work done, particularly for the less commonly taught languages, by some of the governments of representing those countries. The International Korean Educators Network, which has actually had a panel just before this, supporting the study and teaching of Korean, including support of students who are applying for the national exam in world languages for Korean, endorsed by the College Board. The work of Alliance Française and the Goethe Institute, the work of Camões for Portuguese. We're seeing some very substantial assistance, very grounded and closely connected with the profession by some of our quasi-governmental or international support organizations as well. Recommendation number 3. Support heritage languages already spoken in the United States. Dr. Brecht addressed that so eloquently a moment ago. But to note that providing more learning opportunities for people whose home languages is something other than English is one of the things I think probably that shook us the most in the Commission. While the Commission was sitting, we were working with data from 2010 that showed that there were 60 million Americans who speak a language other than English at home. By the time the Commission was finishing up its work, however, that number had jumped to 65 million, just while we were working. The distribution of those people who speak languages at home other than English is not symmetrical across the country. Within the New York public school system, the independent Los Angeles School District, those numbers are in the 40% range. Some 40% of all the kids currently matriculated in those large urban centers speak a language other than English at home. So the need for support of those languages, to value them as contributing to America's national wealth and our national security and our eventual economic competitiveness is something that the Commission has focused on in a major way. We bemoan the fact that historically America has not done that, and heritage languages have tended to die within the 3rd generation. One of the Commission members even said mournfully, does America have to keep being the place where languages come to die? And the answer is certainly not. America should be the place where those languages can thrive in a healthy, rich, inclusive, multicultural, multilingual community, and we'll all be the better off for that. But we have to take action. And specifically, and Marty will show some examples of that as well, but the Commission took note of some of the extraordinary programs already working to support effectively heritage learners, not only in the schools through dual language immersion models, for example, but also in the introduction of heritage language AP-like exams, and most importantly, the availability of dedicated heritage programs for Spanish, French, Portuguese, Russian at our higher educational institutions, dedicated tracks for heritage learners to enable them to, on the one hand, fill the language requirement with their heritage language, something bizarrely we didn't used to allow. But in other words, value your heritage language, use it to fill the language requirement, and here, by the way, is an accelerated course just for you to enable you to do that. Next. Recommendation is to provide targeted attention to Native American languages. This is very consistent with what Dr. Brecht was saying, and I think everything I just said about heritage languages applies in particular to indigenous languages of the United States. And I want to read you something here. We can be proud of ourselves and congratulate ourselves on having thought of this, but in fact, the founders of the American Academy themselves drew attention. This included John Adams, Sam Adams, John Hancock, and James Bowdoin. Listen to this, who in 1781 wrote the following. We believe the study of mathematics and astronomy, vegetation and mineralogy, medicine and history are vital to the expansion of commerce and the encouragement of a productive civic life in our country. Among the 10 topics identified by the Academy founders was the study of language, about which they wrote the following. We believe that an appreciation of the plurality of languages will improve communication domestically and internationally and help the new nation understand its place in the world. We support inquiries into the rationale and genius and idiom of the English language, but we also encourage strong examination of Native American languages and of linguistics more generally. That's not a bad statement for 2017, actually, and it was spoken for the first time in 1781. Unfortunately, the government didn't get back to this too often. They let 238 years go by, but now they're back to where we were. Native American languages. The rehabilitation and 2 models are particularly taken note. That is the mother tongue models that we see in use in Hawaii and Alaska and in the Navajo regions, and also dual language models where the heritage language can work alongside English, and taking note of the successes of those students in graduation rates, college acceptance, and generally healthy lifestyles. And finally, the last recommendation. Promote opportunities for study to learn a language overseas. This is important, as we all know, for reasons, and I think what the Commission is saying, I won't explain to you why overseas study is important. We know that. You could give this talk, but it's important that institutions get better at integrating overseas study than we currently do. Too often right now, whether it's high school or college, the overseas language immersion experience is considered sort of time off. You go abroad, you come back, and then you pick up where you left off before. We've got to get much better at integrating that study and making sure that financial aid, loan programs, and so forth all work in concert to support the overseas study. Mr. Moderator, that's where I'll stop. That's the last recommendation.
So what? I'm going to be taking a slightly different tack here. As Dick alluded to, the 1979 Commission report, Strength Through Wisdom, with more than 70 recommendations, was at best implemented through serendipity. And now, and there's been any number of reports on our educational system over the years, some more or less famous and more or less well-known. So what? Now, what do we do with this, right? You'll notice that these recommendations were at a very high level, and that's designed, that was purposely designed into the report, that if we had 70-odd recommendations, you get down into specifics and the ability to, quibble with any one of them and throw the whole report out. So, and it also does, in fact, put, as Dick noted, it puts the onus back on us to figure out how to do this and to help create this vision that the Commission and the Academy laid out. The report has been, by the way, spectacularly popular. More than 110,000 copies have been downloaded or requested from the American Academy since February 28th, so that's basically March 1st. That's, in roughly 8 months since the release of the report, and more than 50,000 copies of the statistical portrait. So we know that it has an audience. We know that people are interested in the subject. Now, on February 28th, at a luncheon, the president of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Jonathan Fanton, said, we need to keep this momentum going, and that he indicated that the Academy would very much like to continue the work by establishing a working group. The working group consists of representatives of the language profession and groups represented in the report recommendations. So we have about 25 working group members, 4 of whom are on stage. The secretary to the working group, Maria Pulcini, is here as well. She's back at the JNCL Nicholas booth. But we have folks from the language industry. We have representatives from the Native American, Alaska Native, and Hawaiian communities. We have representatives from dual language, from heritage languages. Representatives from the American Association of Teachers of X. In fact, Emily Spinelli is also here, and her brief is to represent all of the other AATs. And that's deliberate so that we ensure that we have not so much the expertise in the room, but that we can reach back into our communities to help take these recommendations and turn them into something that is concrete enough to do something about. We have been asked to create a call to action, a manifesto. I'm not allowed to call it a manifesto, am I? And I can't call it a 5-year plan either, can I?
You just do what you're told.
Oh, I'm supposed to do what I'm told. But it's a manifesto, it's a call to action, and I'm going to return to that in a minute. So that's the first thing that the working group has done. And we're going to talk about that in more depth in just a second. Development of really not so much a document of best practices in language education from around the country, aligned to these 5 recommendations, but in fact collecting those best practices and sharing them. I am struck every time I go to one of these meetings, from ACTFL down to the smallest state meetings that I've been at, I am struck, or any industry meeting, the American Translators Association, the localization meetings, I'm struck by just how much innovation is out there, just how much energy is actually out there. People are taking on tough challenges in our profession, and they're doing something about it. And you see that reflected in the growth in high school enrollments over the last 10 years, a 31% increase in high school enrollments. We're not nearly to a percentage where we need to be, but 31% is a lot. 31% increase is something to celebrate. We see this in the innovative and interesting experiments that are popping up all around the country in distance and blended learning for language. Rural districts from West Virginia to Montana to Alaska to Hawaii, using blended models to provide meaningful, to get their students to meaningful proficiencies. And there are many other examples of that. So these need to be collated and shared and disseminated in a way that lets, not just getting that word out, when I can take that word back to Washington, and I do all the time, but that so that folks who have similar challenges can have access to that information. Organizing a series of events around the country to supplement, to publicize what we've done. Recently, we had an event in North Carolina at a Chinese immersion in Raleigh and Wake County, North Carolina. A number of folks were there, along with Representative David Price, one of the co-signers of the letter from the House of Representatives. Meetings like this, we need to get the word out, and the working group has been charged to do that. Encourage implementation of specific recommendations, and this is the 5-year plan. How do we achieve this vision, where every child in America has the opportunity to learn English, retain their native language if they so desire, learn another language? How do we do that? So we have to encourage the implementation. We have to develop these recommendations to a point where, in fact, we can potentially convene a meeting of very high-level funders and get real commitments over the next 5 years to start moving towards these recommendations and to create new things, but also foster and sustain current best practices. and then creating a record of activities that support all of this so that we can, again, do that. Now, the call to action. There's a letter. It's a nice, it's about a page and a half, and before I get into the details of the letter, it basically says we need to implement this, all right? I'm not going to read it out word for word because I know Marty wants me to get off the stage. She always does. Because I like to talk, right? This call to action, we started collecting signatures on it last Monday. And as of yesterday morning, we had 34 organizations signing on. Now we have 70. A great number of organizations, that would be 36 organizations here at ACTFL, have agreed to sign on to this letter. As Dick noted, and as Dan pointed out, Dan reinforced, it's very important for the Academy, the leadership of the Academy, to see that this is supported by the field. This came from the field. The field was intimately involved in every step of it, lobbying for it, helping establish the commission, developing the white papers, and then, of course, the writing and editing and input on the report. Now we have to go out and show that we can do it. We also have people like Ken Burns has signed on. The former CEO of Lockheed Martin has signed on. The former CEO of Boeing has signed on. So we're getting some, and Medtronic has signed on. So we're getting some significant international companies based in the US. We have partner organizations like the American Association of Universities, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities have signed on, and we'll be asking their members to sign on as well. So when this letter, and I'm just going to, okay, so it basically says there are 5 recommendations, we need to do them, okay? We have a copy of the letter, by the way, at our booth, and if you do represent an organization that has not yet signed on, please feel free to tell me or Maria Pulcini, and we will add your names to the document. When we get to about 200 signatory organizations, we expect that the Academy will put this out on its website. But it's also there as a document that you can take back to your school boards, back to your deans and provosts. It'd be really interesting when you have your president of a university signing on, right? And the dean says one thing and the president said something else. I don't know if that will actually work, but you can try it if you're in a university context. So that we have a document that reinforces what we do and that we'll be using for publicity and for advocacy around the country. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marty, who's going to get into the down and dirty and specifics of what people are doing and the good work you're all doing.
In a few minutes, we'd like to hear from all of you about the best practices that you're implementing, but I thought I would activate your knowledge with some examples under each of the 5 recommendations so that you could see exactly what we're talking about in each of these categories. I don't have to tell you about the incredible teacher shortage that we have. I was just in Texas and I was leaving the airport and there was a big billboard and it said, "Want to teach? When can you start?" And that sums up how desperate we are in this country, with 43 states this year plus the District of Columbia saying that they have a language teacher shortage. So I just wanted to give you an example of what our colleagues at the Wisconsin Association for Language Teachers are doing. They are inviting career switchers to their annual state conference, and they are inviting them to a special pre-conference workshop to orient them to teaching languages, and then they are inviting them to attend the conference for free and assigning them a mentor. So this is just an example of the kinds of things that we want to see replicated around the country in terms of implementing the recommendations. As you know, ACTFL has developed an Educators Rising program, which is designed to encourage young people, even as early as middle school, high school. We know that students start to crystallize those career aspirations around the age of 13 to 15. And so it's important to get them at that age and start talking to them about teaching as a career. So there are resources up on the ACTFL website, and this is another example of the implementation of recommendation number 1. In terms of recommendation number 2, this is a little bit harder to grasp by what we mean. And basically, it's that when Congress commissioned this report, they said, and don't come back requesting a lot of federal funding for the implementation of these recommendations. So when we talk about recommendation number 2, it really is looking at how can we leverage the community resources that we have in existence already to promote languages within our individual communities. So I just had the example of a Star Talk program that we ran in Sunnyvale, California, or there were representatives there from Sunnyvale, California, Hindi community, and it's about how do we take our heritage language learners, our heritage language schools, and help them develop into programs that are in the existing school system and not just on the weekend schools. So it's a great design and helping them become involved in the local public school system so that they are represented there as well. In terms of heritage learners, we know that in Prince George's County Public Schools, right outside of Washington, D.C., they are establishing special programs after school for their heritage learners to help them improve their heritage language so that they are eligible for the state seal of biliteracy. As you know, seal of biliteracy is spreading around the country. Most states have established proficiency levels, and they are working diligently with their heritage learners to get them, even though they don't teach those languages in their school system, they're working with them to see what they need to do to get to the appropriate level to get the seal of biliteracy. The next one is Native American language promotion, and one example is the Miamia of Ohio. The tribe there has been working on helping reclaim their language, and one thing that they realized was that they didn't have any way to develop a curriculum, to develop unit design and lesson plans, so they have been diligently pursuing that and trying to reclaim that language in their schools, which is happening around the country in many, many states with Native American languages. And finally, for the fifth one, this isn't really promoting study abroad necessarily, but it is helping to design high quality study abroad programs, and that is at University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire is working with students who are planning to go abroad, and they are making sure that they have a pre-experience survey and evaluation. They talk to them about reflecting on their experience, what is appropriate, how they can benefit the most and maximize their language learning while they're there, and then they do post-evaluation work with them as well to follow up. We know that implementing a national report like this, it's important to change the attitudes in this country about the importance of languages. So the day after the report came out, we launched a public awareness campaign called Lead with Languages. You can find a lot of information at leadwithlanguages.org, but we are also organizing roundtables and events around the report and around the importance of languages in this country. And I just wanted to point out that the day before Legislative Day for JNCL Nicholas, we will be having an event at the National Education Association to talk about the national language teacher shortage that we have. So we have a number of events that have been planned around that. How can you get involved? As Bill said, you can have your organization sign on to the call to action, and you can tell Bill or me or Dan or Dick or John Tessitore at the American Academy, his email address is there, that your organization would also like to be a signatory on the call to action. You can also communicate your best practices, some of the examples that I just gave, and we hope in a few minutes you'll be telling us more about that. We'll be putting together a way to share these, because as we said, it's going to be up to individual communities around the country to implement the recommendations. Organize an activity in your local community. I think Bill mentioned the one that happened in North Carolina recently in Raleigh. They went to an elementary school that had a Chinese immersion program, and they had representatives from the business community and academe and Congressman Price, David Price, from their district in North Carolina, and it was a great event highlighting the recommendations of the report. And we will also be looking at the activities that you all are doing and making a list for the American Academy, and Maria can take those as well. So we want to hear from you, so please come to the microphone and share your information or ask us any questions, and Dick will be moderating that part.
Thank you all for listening. Now, start speaking. This panel is very interested in the reactions from an audience like this. And so any ideas what you've heard, and particularly the best practices or the initiatives that you can start at the local level is very important for us to hear. Laura, please identify yourself, and then, and I would only ask that you do line up and do move reasonably quickly. Ask questions or make comments, but so we can get as many people to the microphone as we can. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Murray. I'm with the National Security Agency, and I'm the chair of the Star Talk Steering Committee. And I just wanted to follow up on what Marty mentioned about the Sunnyvale program. Actually, as a result of Star Talk summer programs around the country over the last 11 years, we now have more than 250 communities in the United States that have instituted full academic year programs in the Star Talk languages, either in a like a public school or in a community school. So we think this is a really major accomplishment, and it's across many languages. So we know it can happen. We have some pretty good practices for advocacy that can help that happen. So if you are interested, you can contact Star Talk, and we can give you some assistance.
Thank you, Laura.
Hi, I'm Michelle Ancio-Aoki from Seattle Public Schools in Washington State. And building on the Star Talk example, Star Talk initiated some smaller grants this year for expanding world languages opportunities beyond the summer Star Talk program. So one went to One City Project, which is a nonprofit in Seattle, which is trying to promote all of America's languages, Seattle's languages, all the languages of our region, doing that in many ways. They've used that Star Talk funds to identify Vietnamese-speaking interns from the University of Washington who could then be placed at the Vietnamese dual language immersion program in Highline School District and perhaps consider the possibility of going into a teaching career. So I think that's hitting heritage language plus teacher capacity and so on. We have also a new campaign that was launched in August by another nonprofit. So I think one of the things is that the public-private and nonprofit partnerships are critical. One America, everything's one in Seattle it seems like, but One America is an immigrant rights advocacy organization, but they also staff a project called the Roadmap Project in the 7 districts in South King County, which are very diverse, and they have launched a project a campaign that pulls together work that we've done on competency-based credits, where we've tested probably over 60 or 70 languages in our state so students can earn high school credits, the seal of biliteracy, and dual language immersion. So they're trying to give the full package, to give the vision to families to support their children's language from home, and then what to look forward in the school system as they go forward. And one quick question. Are you interested in having Confucius Institute sign on?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you, Michelle. By the way, when you walk to the microphone, you accept responsibility for homework.
We really do need these examples sent to us, mpulcini@languagepolicy.org, so that we can track them. It's vitally important.
It's critical that it just not go into the air here. It has to come into a document. Please.
Patrick Wallace with the great state of Georgia, Georgia Department of Education. I know that I've been informing Bill at least about a lot of things that are going on in Georgia, so I just wanted to share some of the experiences I've had on the job in the last 11 months and what we've been able to put together in Georgia. So first and foremost, we have the seal of biliteracy. We're very proud of that. We had 1,133 students take that option this first year, and we're excited to say that's going to grow. We're sure of that. We also have an rapidly expanding dual language immersion program going from 6 to 40 in 3 years, 6 planned to open next year. We have created the World Language Educator of the Month program to highlight educators and raise them up and put them on a pedestal. So we are going into schools. Our state school superintendent is signing those certificates, and we're going into those schools and highlighting those teachers in front of their other peers, their faculty members, which is incredibly powerful. Next week, we will have, in a couple weeks, we'll have the first model of our International Night for Parents in cooperation with our cultural partners there in Atlanta, the Goethe Centrum Atlanta, the Alliance Française, and others. So we're using our cultural partners that are there. I also work with a group called the Georgia Skills Initiative, which is highly connected with the German American Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Department of Economic Development, trying to create apprenticeship models, but putting language also in that mix. And I'm proud to say also that I'm working across our governmental bodies with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, which is housed under the governor, but also the International Office of the Mayor to create an International Day at our Capitol to recognize the contributions of our international community. And so many more. We're doing dual language immersion in a day activities. We're also got a dual language immersion institute in the summer. So my point is, and I am doing all this in Georgia, I want you to know, without any kind of budget. I have no money, but what we have is passion, and what we have is drive, and we have people at the district level, leadership, critical leadership, that is driving this with me. So much so that we've decided now to create a World Language Leadership Institute in Georgia and draw our district leaders together so that we already meet very regularly, but to do that as well. Another example is we created the University and College Advisory Board to the Georgia Department of Ed. So now we are in direct contact with 27 college and universities in Georgia in their world language departments, harnessing their expertise and their research. So it's very critical that we create great synergy, I think. If you can create great synergy and great transparency, and we can let loose the horses, so to speak, and let all of these great talented people who are passionate about language really engage, whether they belong to a nonprofit, whether they belong to a chamber of commerce, whether they belong to a Department of Ed or economic development. So we really have to become engaged. We are online. We started a Facebook, we started a Twitter. We are running a very aggressive advocacy campaign, I would say. And we are really excited about what's happening. But I want you to know that, again, we are doing this without any money. So you don't need money to change things. So don't think that that is your obstacle. Because if it is, come see me and I'll give you some ideas. Okay, thank you.
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
What about the businesses headquartered in Atlanta and around the state of Georgia?
Right,
Are they participating? Are you involving them?
Absolutely. I just tweeted them this morning in honor of International Education Week to reach out to them to say we appreciate their support of language. We are really connected. I meet pretty regularly with the German-American Chamber of Commerce, but also our French-American Chamber of Commerce. I've met the Japanese-American Chamber of Commerce and all the others. We have 34 binational chambers of commerce. I'm also in direct contact and working collaboratively with the Georgia Chamber, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. So our industries, we have 3,000 facilities from Europe employing 154,000 Georgians, and more are coming every day. Our port was just expanded. It's breaking records every month because ships that are larger, 3 times larger than what they were before the expansion of the Panama Canal this summer happened. They're arriving there. So people are seeing this happening in their own backyards. And then there's also the diversity that's in our community. I always tell people, you don't have to go overseas to encounter diversity. We have that among us. Georgia is multicultural, multilingual. So there's a recognition of that as well and a growing grassroots. I think that's what makes our dual language immersion program so prolific and so successful. One is leadership, but it definitely has to do also with the grassroots and people really taking this model and wanting to know more about it. So we find that we have many, many people in Atlanta and in Georgia who are supportive of international education, whether they are in business, whether they are in other areas. But yes, we are very tightly connected, and we are going to redo our standards. So we've got lots of ideas.
Thank you, thank you. Do you care about your state at all? No, you may, never mind.
I just want to repeat that I'm proud. I was born and raised in Georgia.
Okay.
So I came there.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, I'm Sharon Fechter. I'm from Montgomery College in Maryland, which is a very, very large community college in the suburbs of Washington. And I want to applaud the commission, not only for including me in the work group for implementation of these great suggestions, but for including community colleges at the table at all. So I think this is a trend that we're going to see. If anyone was at the MLA session today, that is an initiative they're going to undertake, But since community colleges educate about half of America's undergraduates, it's very appropriate for us to all be together talking about this issue. And I think the transition between the high school and the community college and the university is not to be ignored in this whole paradigm. We work very closely with our high school partners to help them bring things like Korean and Hindi and other opportunities to their students. We're also active in the alternative certification program. Right now it's just for Spanish, but I hope to expand it to one of our other 13 languages. So thanks again for including community colleges in the discussion. It's in the report, and I appreciate the inclusion of this sector. And to my community college colleagues, many of whom I see here, I'll see you at the Community College SIG tomorrow, and I hope that this will come up in force, and we can decide what we want to do going forward.
Thanks, Sharon.
It's a perfect segue for me. So my name is Erin Fernandez-Mommer. I teach at Green River College in Washington State. So hello, Seattle high schools, public high schools. So I more or less want to echo what the last speaker said about community colleges and higher ed in general. My 2 children are in immersion schools in Washington State. We have some incredible bilingual dual immersion schools in a variety of multiple languages from all over the globe. I just started a global studies concentration at my college through a grant from the Undergraduate International Studies and Foreign Languages grant from the Department of Ed to create the global studies concentration and foment foreign languages at my school. The challenge is that in reality, from the ground, it's very hard to implement policy to require students at the community college and university level to engage in foreign language because of other forces that are at play, and I think you know what I'm talking about. We have a lot of big businesses in Seattle, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and I am interested in finding out more information of how to engage those businesses in the support of our foreign languages at the community college and the university level, because the students that graduate from the dual lingual language programs from elementary school all the way up to high school come to the community colleges and they realize that 90% of their instructors are adjunct and they don't have a lot of time to spend with them, and they're not really supported at the higher ed level in terms of their foreign language acquisition. And I think that writing and reading and arriving at the not just advanced level, I think the students can arrive at the superior level and be immersed in their content areas. A lot of my students are choosing to become dual majors in Spanish or whatever their foreign language is, and their particular content area. So my ask is for resources, if anyone could share that with me, to talk with big businesses and present, or how do I go about doing that? That's my question.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Michelle can raise her hand. Michelle Anciotti at Seattle Public Schools. And my colleague Caitlin Walsh, who teaches, former past president of the American Translators Association, teaches.
Oh, hi.
There are some other folks in the Seattle area who probably would like to talk to. We can discuss this offline. I also certainly recommend talking to Patrick Wallace, who just walked through the amazing things happening in Georgia. It's a neat introduction. For example, the Southeast Asia Center at the University of Washington has a long-standing relationship with Boeing. Boeing sells a lot of jets to Indonesia, and they get Indonesian-speaking kids involved with Boeing to help the delivery of those jets. Help that's a long-standing relationship there. So it's really the pieces are probably there. It's getting the introductions. Because I think the case that we would make, that we always make in business, and there are great Globalization Localization Association is headquartered in Seattle as well. Laura Brandon is not here this week, so there are a lot of folks there who could probably help you with that and build that network.
So maybe through the Jackson School Centers areas, we're working with them with our global studies concentration. So thank you. I'll start there.
So I would certainly talk with folks here, and I'm happy to talk afterwards, because I think it's more having the network and the ability to say, look, we can have this. You want to work with the business sector that wants to work with you, and having a global internet-based economy, and not just internet, of course, but a high-tech economy in Seattle is very helpful, because those companies, for example, the head of global risk assessment from Microsoft, Michelle Cody, they know that they need this. They're frustrated they can't get global competency.
Right.
I'm sure they would love to talk
And I think collaborations with Seattle Public Schools and just the schools in the Seattle area and King County is essential as well to communicate through one system and the other.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mary Thrond, and I live in Fargo, North Dakota, but work in Minnesota. I work and teach in Minnesota, and I am the Minnesota MCTLC Advocacy Chair. And I want to also applaud the Commission for their work, especially for using the term America's languages, because we have seen a tremendous momentum by including Native American languages with ELL learners, in the sense that Minnesota's MCTLC Fall Conference featured an Ojibwe speaker and linguist as our keynote speaker, who is the director of the Ojibwe Immersion School in northern Wisconsin, and they are reporting a higher graduation rate, a lower delinquency rate, and after he spoke from the back of the room, a Dakota speaker from South Dakota stood up to maintain a conversation that absolutely moved all of the people at the conference. And I will tell you that it's the Native American hook that has interested the North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp to push for a seal of biliteracy in North Dakota. And North Dakota has just named the ELL teacher of South Fargo as Teacher of the Year, and she is working also to establish it. So this synergy has been especially powerful. Thank you.
That's a wonderful story. Write it down, send it in. Write it down, send it in, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Catherine Murphy-Judy. I'm from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I really love the idea of the best practices, but I was also thinking in these politically fraught times, I hope you're thinking about giving us strategies for working across aisles and across different constituencies. A few of the people have brought up talking to the business community, but also talking to the political communities with discursive strategies that are going to work. So it's kind of like we have that notion of best practices, but we also have high leverage teaching practices, and those are the ones that we know work because they leverage, and that kind of lobby talk that we don't have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Bill. Please, one more? We have one more. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Martha Gorman, and I am the new incoming editor of TLE, of the Language Educator, your ACTFL publication, your member publication. I'm hearing some very, very powerful stories here that could inspire others to take up the cause for America's languages. And in addition to adding all of your wonderful activities to the AAAS working group, I really encourage you to write them up for the language educator so that they not only go into the survey and are counted, but they can also inspire others to take similar initiatives across the nation. I would love to receive content, and I'm here and I'm happy to speak with you. We have a Heritage Learner special focus topic coming up in the March-April issue. We have a really short deadline on that, beginning of December, but I'd love to work with you on that over the holidays and make certain that we get these stories told. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Yes, yes,
Good.
I have flyers and makeshift business cards, and I really would look forward to hearing from all of you on these recommendations throughout the year. The Heritage Learners is just the next one. I want to talk to Georgia. I want to talk to Minnesota.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is just the beginning. You have to now go home, think about it, write it down, send it in, and start acting. We made a commitment, and this commitment we made to ourselves, that the time is different. To quote an old friend of mine, there is a tide in the affairs of men, when taken at their flood, leads on to fortune. On such a tide are we now afloat. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.